World leaders already have numerous ways of getting their message out, so questions were raised this week when two American media outlets provided an unfettered platform to Russia's Vladimir Putin and Syria's Bashar al-Assad.
Mr. President, thank you very much.
There was little bloom on Charlie Rose's exclusive interview this week with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. The Syrian president denied having chemical weapons.
Again, you always imply that we have chemical weapons.
I have to, because that's the assumption of the president.
He threatened the United States and then claimed if anyone was attacked with chemical weapons, it was the Syrian regime.
Our soldiers in another area were attacked chemically. Our soldiers.
It was reminiscent of Dan Rather's much-panned interview with Saddam Hussein on the eve of the war in Iraq.
This is not a joke. No.
But unlike Rather's exclusive, Rose got credit for at least asking rigorous questions.
Anything have been called
even at this date, you are not sure that chemical weapons, even though you have seen the videotape, even though you've seen the bodies, even though your own officials have been there.
Questionable claims about who used chemical weapons in Syria also found a platform in the New York Times in a full-length op-ed written by Russian President Vladimir Putin. His "Stop in the Name of Love" message got a chilly reception in Washington.
I almost wanted to vomit.
Maybe because Putin suggested that Syrian rebels attacked themselves with chemical weapons to gain international sympathy. In an interview with the Public editor, editorial page editor Andrew Rosenthal said that dubious claim falls into the category of opinion. Try selling that in the newsroom.
Well, I have to say, I thought Charlie Rose's interview was quite good. He was very specific. He got some answers out of Bashar al-Assad, not answers we wanted to hear, but I had never heard him speak like that. I was unfamiliar with his voice. I didn't know he had a weird lisp. And just him being able to say those things with a straight face about who produced the chemical, who did the chemical attack, and saying that with a straight face, saying he thought, that it was the other way around. I thought the Vladimir Putin thing was also interesting. I'm not sure I would have given a straightforward editorial platform on the op-ed pages without an editor's note or something like that, because for Rosenthal to say, oh, it's just a matter of opinion who dropped the chemical, it's not a matter of opinion. We're going to know if we don't know already. Secretary of State John Kerry says we already know. So I think I would have added an editor's note to that before I published it.
I thought that these were two of the most newsworthy events of the past week or two, and the idea that that Assad shouldn't have been interviewed or that Putin shouldn't have been given a platform just strike me as absurd. Now, I thought Charlie Rose's interview was very good. I give him props for asking tougher questions than Dan Rather, although I would point out that Dan Rather was probably in greater danger of being fed into a plastic chipper than Charlie Rose was. The Putin thing I find more interesting for some of the reasons that you mentioned. I thought it was a very interesting op-ed, well argued, made some points about international law that maybe President Obama ought to take a look at. But I think one of the dilemmas for an editorial page editor is, what do you do when a contributor, especially a really prominent contributor like the president of Russia, makes an assertion that really isn't supported by fact, because the bit that the rebels gassed their own people, there's very little evidence for that. All the weight of the evidence goes the other way at this point. I'm not quite sure what you do about that. Maybe you do the editor's note, as you suggest, but I'm glad they ran it, nevertheless.
Yeah, that was a regrettable mark by Andrew Rosenthal, that it was just opinion. I mean, well, he didn't know this yet, but as we're taping today, the UN inspection report is out, and they say, without any equivocation, it was Assad's weapons launched by Assad's forces. So we know that Assad and Putin are bald-faced liars. And given that knowledge, which we pretty much knew anyway, I thought what the Washington Post did was something that the New York Times might have picked up on for their presentation of the Putin article. The Post took the article and parsed it, took it line by line almost, and tore it a new one. And I think that is proper. Yes, let 1,000 flowers bloom, let 1,000 opinions be expressed. But let's not, as journalists, set aside, for any reason, our obligation to be skeptical and point out the truth.
I also thought it was important, it would have been important for the Times to say how they came to have it, which was a fascinating piece of information to me, because I wake up and I hear, oh, Putin has an op-ed in the New York Times. I'm like, how did it get there? What, are they calling him up? You want to write something? I mean, that doesn't make sense. And of course, it came through the Ketchum Public Relations firm, which has a, multi-million-dollar deal to promote Russia, running a website called thinkrussia.com, among other things. That was an important piece to put in an editor's note or something, just so that we readers have that as a part of how we look at this.
I thought it was interesting. Ross Douthat, who writes a column for that op-ed page, said that from now on he's going to refer to Vladimir Putin as my colleague Vladimir Putin, since they've now appeared on the same op-ed page. I mean, I agree with Dan that I think it's very important that we not close off insight into people who are enemies or who are enemies of our country or who have done something that is perceived to be bad. It's very important to keep, during the Cold War, there were plenty of opportunities for Americans to hear Soviet voices and Soviets to hear American voices. They might have disagreed, but it was important to get that across. And considering the last time that we had, 10 years ago when we had a major conflagration in the Middle East starting, there was a lot of intelligence that was assumed to be correct, and it turned out it wasn't correct. So I would be very hesitant to go in to say, well, we shouldn't let some countervailing notion appear. I don't think anyone would read Putin's op-ed and not think, oh, this is clearly coming from an involved character, an important, someone who has a point of view on it. No one's going to say, oh, well, Putin said this, so it must be true. So I think it's important to have that sort of exchange.
And by the way, just one quick addition here. To the extent that people constantly complain about the media that we are loath to correct ourselves or admit when we're wrong, and validly so, here's an opportunity for us to address that. Every journalist who mocked Mitt Romney in the campaign last year for claiming that Russia was our greatest geopolitical foe needs to now go back and write a little mea culpa, because I think he's substantially borne out by recent events.
And there's one other update from today. Actually, John McCain is now going to be writing an op-ed for Pravda, the Russian newspaper.
Seriously?
Yes, that just came out right before we came on there. I'm not kidding.
He's not kidding.
So
That's
could be beginning of a great exchange.
Unedited, I'm sure.
Yeah.